Hi everyone and welcome to the presentation on Credit 101, Understanding Credit. My name is Ari. I'm a graduate assistant for the Successful Start program at Boston College. We do lots of different programming, a lot of different workshops. We also do a Peer Money Mentors program. If that's of any interest to you, please feel free to check out our website if you Google Successful Start Boston College, or you can email us at success@bc.edu. But for today, for this presentation, we're going to talk a bit about the basics of credit. Here is an overview of the first part of the presentation, where we're going to talk a bit about what credit is. We're going to offer some definitions. Then we're going to talk about the main form of credit that most people interact with, credit cards. In that part, we'll talk about some of the rewards that you can get from using a credit card, some of the benefits, but also some of the risks as well. And we'll also go into a bit of detail on some of the typical terms for credit cards. We'll define interest rates. We'll define what you should know about that. And then we'll also talk a bit about some of the advice and tips we have for how to use your credit successfully. So credit fundamentally would be defined as borrowing money. You would use credit if you don't have the money available to you at the time. So when you borrow money, you might have to pay interest. You also potentially will have to pay fees as well, such as a late fee. A credit card is a form of revolving credit where you can repeatedly borrow up to a set amount. So say you have a credit limit of $1,000, you can borrow up to that amount each month, but it could vary. Some months you could borrow more, some months you could borrow less. You'll have to make minimum payments at least, and there are possible fees, such as a late fee, for instance, if you don't pay your credit card on time. So one thing we definitely want to clarify to people is that a credit card is not free money. A credit card is a loan. So a lot of people have the question for us of when should I use cash and when should I use credit or a debit card as well. So these are some questions to consider. You'll want to consider, will you remember what you bought? Will it be something that will still be meaningful and valuable to you later on? Will the item have value? So is it something that has sentimental value? Is it something that has financial value that you could sell at some point in the future if you wanted to? And is the total cost worth it? Is the cost of the item plus the interest that will accrue on it going to be worthwhile to you? Because the item will certainly cost a bit more when you include interest versus if you were to pay for it upfront with cash. So if you are able to answer yes to all of those questions, that would probably be a good use of credit. If you don't answer yes to all of them, you might want to consider paying cash. You might want to consider paying for the item in full, or if you can't do that this time, wait until you can do so. When you receive your credit card statement, it'll include some of the following information. It'll include your outstanding balance, how much you have left to pay off. It'll include what the minimum payment amount would be, so how much you need to pay in order to not be hit with late fees. It'll list the payment date, when you need to pay in order not to be late, the annual percentage rate, which we've discussed on previous slides, and also any rates, fees, or charges included in the calculation. So here just is a list of some of the main benefits of using a credit card. The main one, the first one on the list, is probably the most important, emergency purposes. So a lot of the times, situations will come up that you have not been able to plan for, and instances like that, like if your car breaks down or if the heater fails, for instance, in your home, those are instances where it's nice to have the credit card to make those large purchases. Another is that it's convenient. So what we mean by that is that when you go to a store, you don't necessarily have to carry cash on you. You don't need to remember all that. You just take out the card and you can pay for the purchase. It also is useful for internet purchases. You can't use cash for internet purchases. You could use a debit card for internet purchases, but a credit card will also work for that as well. That's something that cash does not work for. If you want to rent a car, that's something that you'll need a credit card for, since they might want to potentially add on additional costs depending on how the car is returned. One big thing as well is that it's safer than carrying cash. So that's in terms of if you were to lose your wallet, for instance, It's easier to replace the credit card at no real damage to you versus if the cash is lost, it's just gone. It's also safer than cash as well in that there are protections. So if there is some fraudulent activity that goes on, there are protections for you as a credit card user versus with a debit card or with cash, that money is harder to get back. And then finally, there are rewards such as travel rewards or cashback rewards. So maybe your credit card gives you 2% cash back on all of your purchases. That is 2% that will go back to you and that you could use for other kinds of purposes. That's a nice thing to have. These are all some of the reasons why it can be nice to have a credit card. So aside from some of the immediate benefits that we talked about on the previous slide, there are some larger picture outcomes that can be positive that come from wise credit use. One is that it's easier to rent an apartment. So when you rent an apartment, your landlord will likely do a credit check to see how safe it is to trust you with a long-term lease. This is something where having a strong credit history from using your credit card can be a benefit. Same with if you want to buy a car, having that credit history will be useful. Similarly, a credit history that is strong can be useful for getting better interest rates. So if you need a personal loan, for instance, the interest rate will be lower on that if you have a stronger credit history, if you have a stronger credit score, and that will ultimately save you money in the long term. Like you can see on the bullet point there below, using credit card responsibly can help you establish good credit, which can help you in a lot of different areas. So though there are certainly many benefits like we discussed before, there are a lot of risks to using credit cards. One is certainly the fees, as we kind of mentioned, like a late fee. So if you don't pay on time, there will be fees and you will be penalized for that. There also are almost across the board for all credit cards high interest rates. This is something we'll talk about a bit later when we talk about interest rates, but that can result in you paying a lot more money for a purchase. For missed payments, there's not really much of a grace period, short or potentially no grace period for missed payments, whereas there can perhaps be better grace periods, more lenient grace periods for other kinds of missed payments, for other kinds of forms of credit. Another issue is that it can lead to you making impulse purchases or emotional purchases. A lot of the time, people can feel like they have more money than they do when they have a credit card. It can lead them to making purchases that they ultimately can't afford, which can lead to, as you can see below, bad credit. And that bad credit, in the same way we talked about how having good credit can lead to a lot of these positive outcomes in the previous slides, if you were to reverse that, bad credit can lead to a lot of negative outcomes in those different areas. And then finally, a lot of the terms for credit can be pretty confusing, and that's something that can lead to you potentially making some mistakes that you did not plan for or account for. So one of the main things you're going to want to get an understanding of when you're reading a credit card offer is the APR, the annual percentage rate. That is the annual interest rate. So how much of interest you're going to accrue over the course of the year. So there might be different APRs for different features of your credit card, such as if you were to do a balance transfer or to get a cash advance, or if you were to default, meaning that you would not be able to pay back. So there might be different APRs for these different circumstances, so make sure to read the characteristics of your credit card offer thoroughly. There might also be a variable interest rate as compared to a fixed interest rate. So there might be an interest rate that changes over time or that changes based on some other kinds of factors. So definitely read into that. Credit card offers can sometimes be pretty dense and pretty challenging to read. Definitely take your time. So also in the credit card offer, it'll have information on the grace period, how long you have to make a payment before it's considered late. There also will be descriptions of the different fees. So we mentioned the late fee already, but there also might be annual fees for your credit card to use it. You might have to pay a certain percentage or a certain amount in order to actually use the credit card. There most likely will be fees regarding if you were to get a cash advance, if you were to get some of the credit taken out as actual cash, actual dollar bills. There might be fees if you go over the limit, and meaning that you spend more than your credit card limit, or if you or if you attempt to. And there also might be fees for other kinds of reasons as well. Those will be mentioned within the offer. And there's other potential fine print. Definitely take your time to read. Now for this portion of the slides, we're going to switch over to talking about interest rates, the different types of them, and how they are determined. Interest fundamentally is a charge that you pay for the usage of a loan, for the usage of borrowing this money, and it is usually advertised as a percent of a borrowed amount. So you might see a loan with a 5% interest rate, 4% interest rate, 6% interest rate. That is how it is described. So the payment is applied for when you pay off a loan. It is applied in this order you can see here below. It's paid towards fees first, then interest. It'll go towards the lower interest rate balance first, and then the higher interest rate balance. And then finally, after that, it is applied towards the principal or the base amount that you were loaned. So as you can see, it certainly is applied in a way that is favorable towards the person providing the loan, but that it can potentially be expensive for the person who is using the loan. So there are two different types of interest rates, at least two larger categories, fixed rate and variable rate, and they're pretty much what they sound like. In a fixed rate interest rate, the rate does not change regardless of any kind of outstanding factors. So in that case, the lender is the one who is experiencing the risk. If the rates were to increase, they do not necessarily get to benefit from that, versus if you're using a variable rate loan, then the rate can change. And in that case, the risk would be on the borrower if the rates were to increase. For something like a credit card, there are adjustment periods. Those are periods where the credit card rates can change. It might be annually, it might be quarterly, it might be monthly, depending on the terms of the contract. The purpose of this is that it allows the lenders to maintain the margin that they have. It also will be changed to keep the lendee, the person using the credit card, up to date on what they can expect from their credit card interest rate. So there is a grace period for when you're using a credit card. This is something that we would recommend most users take advantage of if they can. So a grace period is a particular number of days without interest. For most credit cards, that would be somewhere between 20 days to 1 month. So if you were to pay off the balance in full for the billing period before the due date, you'll be able to have used that loan without having to pay any interest on it. However, though, if you're only making the minimum payments, there will not be a grace period, and you'll experience interest being charged from the date of purchase. So if you can, pay off the credit card balance in full before the due date. As you can see on the slides here, there are a couple of different ways that interest changes can be calculated. The most common one is the average daily, where they take the outstanding balance, what is the balance that has yet to be paid off, and divide that by the number of days that it has gone without being paid off. This is the most common. However, there are others that can be potentially more expensive, such as the 2-cycle, where they take the outstanding balance for the last month and this month and divide that by the number of days. That can lead to a greater change in interest. So definitely ask your credit card provider how they plan to calculate interest changes and take that into account when you're deciding on what credit card to use. And if you're interested, please follow the link on the slides for a bit more information on this topic. Now, after talking a bit about interest rate, we're going to shift over to talking about some of the different types of fees that you might pay when you're using a credit card. There are several types of different fees that you might pay if you use a credit card. This is a list of just some of them. There might be others outside of this list. So you might certainly pay a late fee. That's something we've discussed. So if you do not pay your minimum payment by the deadline, then you will be charged a fee for that. You might have an annual fee for your credit card, so you might have to pay a certain amount each year to use the credit card. There might also be an ATM fee. So if you use the card at an ATM, you may have a fee for that. There might be a fee if you go over your credit limit. There might be a fee for using the cash advance feature. And there might be a fee for if you are transferring the balance somewhere else. To give an example, we're going to look at the cash advance fee. So this is an example of how the fees can add up pretty quickly. On a $20 cash advance, you'll have a fee of 3% of the amount, but there might also be the requirement that that 3% is no less than $5 or more than $50. So while 20%, or rather 3% of $20 would be less than $5, the requirement that it be no less than $5 automatically brings it up to a $5 fee. So a $5 fee on a $20 cash advance, as we can see from the slides, is a hefty 25%. So this can add up pretty quickly. It's also worth investigating the fine print, and what we mean by that is there might be conditions for where your rate gets raised higher. So like it says on the slides, 24.99% or higher. Some of these conditions might be if you fail to pay on time, if you fail to pay another creditor on time, if you have a check not go through for a credit card payment, or if you exceed your credit limit. This can result in a higher interest rate than you would typically plan, so make sure to read carefully. Also, something to consider is that credit cards have many temptations, certainly. So these might be bonuses, such as free gifts, miles or points towards airlines, cashback, or other types of discounts. Or it could be teasers, such as introductory rates, balance transfer opportunities, or other types of limited time offers. These different temptations can all be quite nice, certainly, but they can also lead to you spending more money than you had planned. So certainly keep an eye on that. If you're looking to try to save some money using credit cards, it's important to take a look at what your habits might be. These are some examples of how that might look. So for instance, a cup of coffee in the morning can come out to $20 a week. Eating out can come out to $35 a week. A night out with the friends could come out to $45 a week, and all of this can add up to $100 a week, or up to $400 or $500 a month. So this is not to say don't enjoy those things, but it is to say to keep track of how much you're spending and to make a decision for yourself if that's ultimately worthwhile, if that's ultimately worth the cost. For a lot of people, they might not know the different types of costs that they're having. They might not know the expenses, and they might not necessarily know how quickly it adds up. So it's important when you're making the decision on how you want to spend your money to have all of the information available to yourself and to keep track of what your habits and expenses are. The real reason for that, the reason why we suggest you consider that, is because the true cost of charging $100 on your credit card, that value we took from the previous slide, it can add up really quickly. At the end of the first month, if you're making only the minimum payments, you'll have a balance of $400 and a minimum payment of $12. By the end of the first year, you'll have a balance of $4,713 and a minimum payment of $146. And you can see how it continues for up to 19 years. So these different charges can really add up, and if you're only making the minimum payments, it can take certainly quite some time. So this is a two kind of pronged approach we're suggesting you take. One, consider what expenses you're making and consider how valuable they are to you. And also, where possible, make more than a minimum payment. That will save you a lot of money in the long run and a lot of time. So after seeing some of these risks on the previous slides, you might feel uncomfortable using credit, which we recommend certainly that everyone uses a credit card, but we can understand that it might not be the best option for everyone. So we want to list some potential alternatives that you can use. Of course, there's cash, which is the standard form, arguably, of paying for things and is accepted in most physical locations. There are also checks, debit cards, ATM cards, as well as using a potential loan option as well. But there are alternatives to using a credit card. So with everything being said, here's a bit of a summary on how to use your credit successfully. You're going to want to identify your spending habits and identify where your money is going. Understand the fine print and what kind of fees you might expect. You're going to want to use your credit cards wisely and not make extraneous purchases. Try to limit yourself to only 1 or 2 cards rather than opening up a ton of different cards. Pay the balance in full each month, and be sure to ask for help at the first sign of trouble. The Successful Start program can help with that, so please feel free to reach out to us. With all that being said, we want to certainly hear what questions you have. If you want to email us, please reach out to us at successfulstart@bc.edu. We also have a website where we have other presentations available, www.bc.edu/successfulstart. And we also have social media both on Twitter and Facebook where we share articles and advertise upcoming events. So please follow us on those links as well. But if you have any kind of questions on this presentation or anything that comes up, please reach out to us via email and we'll be happy to help. Otherwise, we hope that this presentation has been helpful for you, and we hope that you feel a bit more comfortable now talking about and thinking about credit cards.